There's 4 basic ingredients in beer, and barley malt is one of them. Brett, where does Urban Artifact get their malt?
Well, Mike, that's a great question because I thought you were going to ask me what the other 3 ingredients in beer were, and I was prepared to say flesh, blood, and bone.
That one comes out in October.
But when I'm buying my malt, I buy from Malt Europe because they make the best quality malt at the best possible price. Some of the best breweries in the world use Malt Europe, and I am proud to say that Urban Artifact is one of those breweries.
Do you have to be a commercial brewery to use Malt Europe malt?
You don't. You can head down to your local homebrew store and you can find a wide selection of Malt Europe malts there. So if you're a pro brewer or a home brewer alike, get the best value, the best product at the best price. Get Malt Europe.
And they support us. So Prost.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to part 2 of the Jim Koch interview. My name is Brett Coleman Baker, and as always, I am here with Michael Morgan. Mike, how the hell are you?
I look spectacular.
That is true. And for those of you who are listening on the podcast, we are also doing these intros in video format on our Brew Skies YouTube channel, and you can listen to the full episodes there as well, in addition to weekly content we put out under the Booze News show that we do. Yes. But that's not why we're here today. What we're here today is for part 2 of the Jim Koch interview. Mike, give us a quick rundown of what to expect on this part before we dive into the interview.
In this part, there was a die-off in craft beer in the 1990s. Lasted for about a decade. And when we started doing Brew Skies Happy Hour podcast, one of the things that we wanted to explore was why did that happen? Because there are a lot of people that have a lot of theories and a lot of things that even become accepted fact. You know, that it was a natural reaction of a capitalist market, supply and demand. There were too many craft breweries too quickly, so it was a natural correction.
It certainly wasn't a hit piece.
Could not have been like one piece of media. It could not possibly have been one Dateline NBC episode that actually crashed an industry for almost a decade. But as it turns out,
sometimes conspiracies are true.
Sometimes. Actually here, this story is incredible of what happens when Anheuser-Busch decides they need to destroy Jim Koch and the rest of the craft beer industry in the process, largely to just get to Jim Koch.
Well, let's get into it.
By the time we get into the late 80s, early 90s, Boston beer is 30% of the craft market, but the craft market's still a tiny percentage of the overall beer market. Nevertheless, big beer, and really specifically Anheuser-Busch, August Busch III, decides that you're the devil and you need to be destroyed.
That was so weird.
So what happened, man?
I pissed him off. And
how? How? What did you do?
Well, I know the specific moment. We won the Great American Beer Festival.
Yeah.
For
3 years in a row, right?
Yeah, it was, and then there was a year where we didn't enter, and then we won a 4th year.
Nice.
So we were able to characterize that. Charlie said, "Well, you can call it 4 years running." And so, okay, good. And we had a banner with that, and it was in a beer distributor's warehouse. I mean, they put the different brand banners up, and some of them had, Elvira and things like that. Yeah. Ours said, the best beer in America, winner of the Great American Beer Festival. And they've been up there for a couple of years. And
here's what I found.
What'd you find? Was that you? Was that me?
I think it had to be you.
Oh, Siri?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, my gosh, Mike, I think August is listening.
If good, it's possible.
Yeah, August, are you there? August, leave me alone. Oh, so he goes on vacation in Hawaii, And he thought of these independent beer distributors like my distributor, and rightly so. He made them very rich. He was a very, I have total respect for the man. He was passionate. He cared about quality. He cared about winning.
Yeah.
And in business, that's an important trait, and doing it in a way that he considered honorable.
Budweiser is consistent.
The
For
beer is
whatever else it is,
it's very good, but he tasted samples every day from different breweries, and he had a whim of iron. He wiped out a significant portion of the German hop growing industry, the part that made one of the five noble hops. It was Hersbrucker, and it was a primary hop in Budweiser, and he got, quote unquote, a head feeling from samples that had more Hersbrucker in it, and he paid off his hop contracts and stopped using it.
Wow.
Out of quality concerns. So right or wrong, you have to respect the guy. And he was in Hawaii, but is he laying on the beach like you and me? No, he's inspecting the warehouse of his wholesaler there to make sure they're meeting his standards. The beer is kept cold. You can eat off the floor, all those things. And he sees this banner, and he stops. And he looks, he points up at it and asks the general manager, "So do you think Sam Adams is the best beer in America?" And the guy said, "I don't know. I just a beer distributor. They give us the point of sale. August, I just put it up." He says, "Do you think Sam Adams is the best beer in America?" And this goes on. And August refuses to move. "I am standing here until you take that blah, blah, blah banner off the wall of this warehouse." And he stood there, and they had to get some, big crane and move pallets of beer and take the banner down. And that began...
The guy's richer than God at this point.
He's, actually, he was doing well, but the family had so many kids. They loved having kids, so the ownership was so fragmented.
Yeah.
He had less than 1%, I think. So
Oh, wow.
relatively.
Okay.
He had plenty of money.
He wasn't going to live
nice
under a
farm.
bridge, but he
he had private this and that. But he wasn't Bill Gates, but he was just doing fine. And that began what Paul Shipman at Red Hook, which at that time had been acquired by Anheuser-Busch, Paul called it, with some glee, the ethnic cleansing. And this was at a time of the Balkan War where that had, real meaning.
Right.
Of, trenches with 1,000 dead Muslims in them. Anyway, so that was that was a little frightening, because the most powerful man in the entire global business of beer has decided
Jim
that
Koch
I
needs to be
need
cleansed.
to be ethnically cleansed. He's probably had a trench dug somewhere for me, and it was not without a little bit of scariness, because a guy that I knew had been very, very high up in Anheuser-Busch, and he was at another brewery, and he gave me advice. He said, "Jim, don't park your car in really dark places. Be really careful late at night." And I'm like, "You must be paranoid." And he said, "No, after I left AB, I always, before I went through, the scanning at the security at the airport, I always opened my luggage and made sure nobody had planted drugs."
Wow.
Really? And I thought, he must be paranoid. And after the phone call, I thought, wait a minute. He is paranoid, but he knows. He was on the executive committee there. It was called ABIS.
He was issuing the hits before he was scared.
Yeah, he had been there. That's right. And there was this thing called ABIS, which was, I think, Anheuser-Busch Investigative Services.
Oh, wow.
And it hired like ex-FBI
Budweiser has
people.
its own FBI.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the ex-head of the FBI was on their board. So
Good
then I
God.
realized, oh, shit, this is real. I mean, I can't believe it in this day and age something like that would happen. But what I was told is, well, it wouldn't happen directly, but, maybe in a meeting with the Teamsters, August might just drop I wouldn't mind if somebody beat the crap out of Jim Koch. And it was like, I was thinking of, who will rid me of this meddlesome priest for murder in the cathedral? I was like, oh, okay. You drop a hint in front of the right people and shit happens.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit of a, I was like, I'm scared, but should I be scared? Well, should I not be? Anyway, so it was an interesting time. But the end of the story is I'm still here.
Yeah.
And he's all gone.
Yes, he is. He is all gone. He lost his
He's
company.
Stomping around at Grant's farm. I am told he now has a rollerboard given to him by the Heineken family because he's so, bothered by what happened. And and I mean, to this day, I still think about that, and I just think I got to respect the guy. He's now carrying a Heineken rollerboard because he respects families and beer heritage and history, and he made fundamental strategic mistakes of thinking I was the enemy. And I remember talking to another very senior AB guy at a beer industry conference, and hopefully trying to talk a little bit of sense in him and not realizing this was a holy war. But I said, look, I am not your enemy. I'm not August's enemy. I'm a
Just
little American
percentage-wise,
brewer.
you're not a threat.
Yeah, you have enemies, but those enemies are in in Dublin and in Brazil, and in places you may not even know about, like China or somewhere else, because this business is going to globalize, and you have the opportunity to lead it and think really big, and you're trying to kill little Jim Koch when you've got a big global game getting played out, and I'm not sure that you are winning at that.
And you were right. Globalization's what kicked his ass.
Yeah, a bunch of very smart, very tough, very strategic Brazilians outsmarted and outmaneuvered him and took his company away. And I honestly think that was a big loss for American brewing. As much as he tried to put me out of business, I was very sad when that happened.
When you go to St. Louis and kind of talk some of the culture there, it is interesting that for all of Anheuser-Busch's flaws, they were still an American company.
They were a great company.
They still actually cared a lot about St. Louis.
Yes.
Which is not something that you can say about AB InBev.
No, that's not their business model.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, it was a loss for St. Louis, it was a loss for America. But it's business. He got outsmarted. I mean, it's again a warning for anybody in business. As strong and as powerful and as dominant as they were, there was a bunch of guys from what at the time was a third world country plotting, that was planned a good 5 years in advance.
Yeah.
That wasn't just a spur of the moment grab an opportunity. They were totally strategic. You gotta, if you're gonna be in business, you don't take a day at the beach. There's always somebody who may be smarter and hungrier and tougher and more resourceful and maybe a little bit luckier out there. And you got to be at the top of your game.
Arrogance is a dangerous thing.
That's my grandmother told me several times, humility is a virtue. And I've always remembered humility is a virtue.
Yeah. It's a German thing, too.
Probably right. Her name was Couts.
Yeah. What could Anheuser-Busch attack you for? What did they attack you for is really the more appropriate question.
Yeah. Well, they went after us on every front.
Yeah.
We got, in this ethnic cleansing, we got kicked out of dozens of Anheuser-Busch wholesalers in very short order, just dropped, and had to scramble, find new distributors. They would go after our point of sale.
And that was the way they would do that was essentially, my family used to own an IGA, a small grocery store in Appalachian. My grandfather, and when Walmart moved in with like the Pepsi distributorships, it was a question of, well, you can service those small guys. Or you can service us, but you can't do both. Was that essentially what they did with the distributors?
Oh, it was. They didn't even have to be that subtle. It was like, all right, August would like you to show your loyalty, and you have 100% share of mine from us. We need 100% share of mine from you. It was literally a campaign, and they graded wholesalers A, B, C, and D. I mean, you can't blame them. They made these guys rich. I mean, they owed August that fealty, and they knew who made their money for them, and it wasn't. And he'd earned that. He'd earned that.
Yeah.
And
or at least Budweiser had.
Yeah, Budweiser had, and I don't hold it against them that they showed loyalty to the person who had done so much for them and their families. They were beholden to Anheuser-Busch, and when the time came, they did the right thing and screwed me.
Yeah.
And okay, I'm a grown up. That stuff happens, but it's not because anybody's a bad person. So we had that.
Well, some of this sounds like pretty shitty behavior to me, but it's. I respect your bigness.
I try to find the I mean, I think people are inherently good, and I think that is my interpretation of their behavior. And I don't hold it. I mean, and some of them are now my distributors again.
Yeah.
And I'm not gloating or anything like that. It's like, welcome back, because they were good people when I appointed them, and they didn't become bad people because they did what their primary supplier wanted them to do. And they would tear our point of sale down in the market. They'd move our shelves. So it was kind of hand-to-hand combat. And then they went to the federal government and petitioned that, what was it? They wanted that you had to put the name of your contract producer on the beer label instead of your name. So mine would have had to say made by Pittsburgh Brewing. Now, I always had
Which was an attack because you were still doing essentially entirely contract brewing.
At that point, that was right before we bought the Cincinnati brewery here.
Yeah.
And I had always put Pittsburgh on there as the brewing location, which we didn't have to do, because Anheuser-Busch didn't put Houston, Texas, or Merrimack, New Hampshire on there. They just put St. Louis, even though it wasn't made in St. Louis.
Right.
I always put the brewing location, and our contracts had always been, we have every control of this process and this product that an owner does. So to me, it was misleading to put brewed by Pittsburgh Brewing when they had zero control over the ingredients, the product, the process, etc. So that was, and the at that time BATF looked at it and said, that makes no sense. And they didn't even review that petition, but that's actually still an active petition. They never withdrew it. And if you look at all these craft brewers that Anheuser-Busch bought, not a single one says brewed by Anheuser-Busch, not one. So if I were a little more of a jerk, than I actually am. I've been tempted to write a letter to now the TTB supporting Anheuser-Busch's petition. Yeah, it's a great idea. Let's do that. Why don't you require that of people? So that went nowhere. And then they started an attack campaign, an advertising campaign, this national advertising campaign. Claimed that I was tricking. It was around Halloween, and the ghost of Sam Adams came to my door, and they had a fake Jim Koch voice, and Sam Adams was mad that I was deceiving people, blah, blah, blah. And
all based on the idea that you were deceiving people because rather than having a big brewery somewhere, you were doing contract brewing.
That's right.
You were still entirely using your own brewers, making your own beer, overseeing the entire process.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so they ran that, and then I had a lawyer in Minnesota who called me, and he, I forget his connection to Boston Beer, but he said, I just heard that ad. That is an illegal ad. That is
good for him.
Yeah, that is false and misleading on their part, and you should sue them.
Sometimes lawyers help.
Yeah, and well, it's and I had actually called my lawyer who incorporated me, and he's not an advertising lawyer or anything, and I said, I think this ad is misleading, and he said, Jim, it doesn't matter. I said, what do you mean? That's illegal. It doesn't matter. Can't I sue Anheuser-Busch? And my lawyer, Fred, he said, Jim, do you play polo? What do you mean, Fred? Do I play polo? Of course I don't play polo. And then he said, well, if you don't play polo, you can't afford to sue Anheuser-Busch. So I went back to the first lawyer, and he said, you don't have to sue them. The Better Business Bureau has an arm called the National Advertising Bureau that is set up to adjudicate these disputes outside of the full legal process, and it is very respected. And if they find against Anheuser-Busch, the FTC is very likely, at a minimum, to write them and say you have to stop this, and if they don't, the FTC will sue them for you.
Nice.
So yes, so I took them to the adjudication mechanism of the Better Business Bureau. We won. We got tiny articles. They had to retract it and change it, but by that time, all the damage was done. But
the retraction is never as big as the allegation.
Yeah, it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. They had this other PR campaign that started with a long NPR segment about it. It came out of, guess what, NPR station, the one in St. Louis.
St. Louis, shocking.
Yeah.
That's shocking.
And then they milked that, and and there was a Dateline NBC story about, and it
turned out to be a real hit piece.
It went right after craft brewing. It wasn't just, and they teased it during the World Series. It was, before you buy another pricey microbrew, there's something you should know. Watch Dateline, NBC on Tuesday. And it was a hit piece. And I actually had a friend who had worked at General Electric. And at that time, General Electric owned NBC. And I asked him to, plead my case to a very senior person at GE. And the answer we got was, look, we can't really make money on the Olympics without Anheuser-Busch. You're probably not going to like the way the piece comes out, but we're not changing it. So it came out the way it did.
Welcome
I think
to
it was
American journalism.
Chris Hansen, who later got thrown off the air for some kind of I think child molesting or something. There was something unsavory that got him thrown off the air. But
we're going to go with pedophilia.
whatever. I can't remember, but because he was a really good journalist. I mean, he did his job really well. The way they edited it and even lit it was, as soon as I saw the lighting, because I had this dark shadow lighting on my face, and I go, oh, this is not going to come out well. Oh, no. So it came out, and that...
Who's killing you with beer?
Yeah,
This guy.
that's right. What poisons are going to be in that pricey craft beer? And it did exactly what they intended. It was incredibly effective. The growth rate of craft beer, the entire industry, went from 25% to 0 within 6 weeks. I've never seen anything like that in a consumer product other, than, carcinogenic tainting.
Right.
It was, craft beer didn't grow again from October of '96 until about 2004.
And so we look back at the 90s. We've had this conversation a lot on Brew Skies about what the hell happened in the 90s. Was it the kill-off that we kind of seem to remember? And if so, why? And so it seems that a lot of what happened in stagnation and craft in the 90s, and even the dying of hundreds of breweries, it's all traceable to an ad campaign by Anheuser-Busch to quash craft.
Ad and PR. The PR was very effective as well.
Yeah, I mean that's crazy that one brewery, and that's before they became, that's back when they were still the quote unquote good Anheuser-Busch. That's before they were AB and Bev. That they had enough power to have such a detrimental effect on the entire industry.
Yeah, almost to stop a cultural movement, because craft beer it has an aspect of being a business, but what's really foundational is it's a cultural movement.
Right.
And it's part of, an artisan culture, an artisanal culture, and they couldn't kill it. It was too strong for them to kill it. But they were able to stop the growth for 8 long years.
Which, that did a lot of damage. And
we're still here.
You're
and
still
we're sitting here, and we're drinking great beer.
Great beer. Fantastic
Life
beer.
It's okay. It all has a happy ending.
The Brew Skies Happy Hour podcast is a production of Brew Skies Limited. This episode was edited by Dan Fennessy, who is also our executive producer. This podcast was engineered by Adam Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.